dealing with the loss of a loved one is always a traumatic experience, and with those who have COVID-19, it's particularly difficult as a family and friends are cut off from the patient. But there are new ways, thanks to technology, to better communicate with patients and hospitals alike. We're joined by Bhekisisa Centre for Health Journalism's Joan Van Dyk. She's got more details on this for us. Of course, Joan, the biggest problem has been that for many patients, once they go into that ward, they're simply not seen again by their families unless and until they get better, or of course if the worst happens and they lose their lives.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a lot that's changed about the way that doctors communicate with their patients. The first thing is that they can't touch patients anymore to console them or to reassure them, because that's one of the ways that the virus spreads, is through contact. And that can make care very impersonal. And both the doctor and the patient are masked up completely. Doctors are wearing lots of layers of PPE. They're also wearing one of those plastic visors, which they have to sanitize all the time. So it gets misty and you can't see through it properly. And that's just a barrier to communication that wasn't usually there. The doctors are avoiding the COVID wards because of the infection risks, understandably, and families don't get to meet the doctors because, firstly, they can't visit the hospital, and secondly, the teams of doctors are rotating. It's not like you usually would go and sit down with your surgeon and find out what's going to happen to your family member. The whole system has changed.
Of course, what this means is that families then don't really get a true sense of the treatment that is taking place for their loved ones beyond the COVID wards. And I suppose even for doctors themselves, having to deal with the number of patients that they're dealing with, it can also be quite traumatic.
Yeah, this is traumatizing for everyone. The patients being isolated like that can be very fear-inducing, very anxiety-provoking, and make it very stressful for them to cope with their illness, which is COVID. The missing communication can also be really bad for grief counseling. And that's because we know from research that when families can't say goodbye properly, when their loved ones die suddenly or in pain or possibly in an ICU, it's a lot more difficult to deal with grief when that happens. And for the doctors as well, I mean, they're dealing with death upon death and they don't have time to deal with it either. So they're at a high risk of burnout from all of this.
So what is the technology then that is being developed to help solve some of these problems?
Yeah, at Vincent Pallotti Hospital, it's a private hospital in Cape Town, they've come up with quite an interesting way to try and make the front lines just a little bit easier to deal with for everyone. And it's something that could be quite useful for other hospitals to look into. They are using an Airtable app, which is a spreadsheet and database app, to keep track of all the COVID patients. They've customized it so that doctors, when they get to each COVID patient, they can just click on a drop-down menu and choose an option of how it's going with that patient, whether it's improving, deteriorating, ventilated, those kind of options are already loaded for them. That message is then linked to a counselor's phone, and each patient will be linked to only one counselor because they can't only have one doctor. At least they're getting to know one counselor and the families and so on. And the patient will then get counseling. The counselor might take photos or schedule a call with the doctor and just keep everyone in the loop. But as you can imagine, putting in place a new system like this, when there's a crisis, and Vincent Pallotti put this system in place when the Western Cape was really seeing a big wave of cases, that's quite a tall order. So what the counsellors did to make that a little bit easier for people is to make sure that everyone understands exactly how the app works. They also suggested that the doctor's WhatsApp voice note, the update to the counsellors who can then update it. But the penny really dropped for the doctors on this, and they were really sold on this new system when they saw how well this is working for families, and not just for families, but for their own sense of comfort as well. They would get photos from families through the counsellors of, say, a patient that they might have helped off a ventilator and who's now at home and happy, and maybe positive messages coming from the families back home, and that's been very motivating for them.
All right. Sure. Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
The downside, to the system is that it costs 350 Rand a month for this app, and you would also need a coordinator who makes sure that everything is running smoothly. And it can't be someone's second job because it's quite a task to get all of this running.